Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the Linux for hackers. So, as we know, by very nature, hackers are the doers. They believe in touch and play with things, right? And at the same time, the hackers that we are talking about, that we are trying to make you will be the ethical hacker. You will be the white hat hacker who will not do hacking without permission. And why are you going to do hacking? You are doing so to protect the environment of the company, the organization, from the black hat hackers. Okay, who try to break into somebody else's system. So always take a note that with great power comes big responsibilities, right? So don't play with it in a wrong sense. It is easy to get caught. So use it sensibly. Okay. So before we get into the nitty-gritties, Linux is always a very interesting operating system because it has a graphical user interface which you are seeing, right? This is the interface of Kali Linux. Kali Linux is again a Linux distribution based out of Debian, but which is different than Red Hat. The commands, a few commands are different, but you know, Linux is very powerful, very fast, but you will be considered good in Linux not just because you can open a graphical interface, but because you know the commands, right? And you know the right set of commands. You don't have to know all the thousands of commands. You should know the most important commands that we all use day in and day out in Linux. Okay, so in this first session, which is an introductory session on this Linux for white hat hackers, so let's look at, let me open text editor. Okay, let's talk about first binaries. What are binaries? Let's talk about few terms and concepts. Okay, like what is binaries? These are the same files. You know, in Windows you used to have executable files, right? star.exe. If you search for it in in Windows, star.exe, you will see many executable files like notepad.exe, isn't it? So these are executable files in Linux as well. So they are called binaries. They are called binaries, right? Similar to executable files in Windows. And where they reside in USR bin folder. They reside in USR bin folder, or they reside in /usr sbin folder directory. Okay, so in Linux the binary commands are like the most common utilities like ps, cat, ps for process, cat for listing out the content of any file, ls is listing the files in a particular directory, or say ifconfig, which is nothing but the interface config details, the network interface configuration details. So we will touch all these commands in this session. So binaries, I'm sure that now you have understood what is a binary, right? And you should also know that in Linux, unlike Windows, we have to worry about case sensitivity. Okay, the commands are case sensitive. In Windows that was not the case, but here if you don't write it properly, Like if ls has to be written in lowercase, if you have to write it in lowercase. If you write it in uppercase, it will throw error, file or directory not found. Okay, so basic first, right? We should know this, that Windows things work easily, but here in Linux, whether you use Kali Linux, you use Red Hat Linux, the commands are case sensitive. Even the files, everything is case sensitive, right? And the folders that we used to call in Windows, here we call them directories. Even in Windows we call them directories, but most probably we are more familiar with the term folders, right? So here in Linux, directories also provides us the way to organize files, usually in a hierarchical manner, right? That there is a parent folder, within that parent folder child folders will be there, right? And every user will have a home folder. Every user will have a home folder. Every user will have a home folder where the files created by that user will be stored by default. Although that user, if they have rights to store files in other folders, they can store files in other folders, but by default it will get stored in their home folder. Okay, and like Linux, like in Windows, you have the super user called administrator, right? You have administrator as a super user in Windows, right? So in Linux, the super user is known as root. The super user is known as the root, who will have all possible rights on the Linux machine. Root user is the super user, is the administrator. So you have to be very careful with the root user. You should not store the root user password in a common place. You should not upload the root user details in any public directory on the internet. Otherwise, hacker will easily log into your machine and can destroy your machine. The data, anything can be copied, hacked. Okay, and then root. So yeah, let me write that root user is like a super user in Linux, right? And then in hacking, we generally use a set of commands, a series of commands to run, and they are called scripts. They are usually called scripts, which are nothing but series of commands that can run in the Linux environment, right? And most of the hacking tools, we use simple scripts, and those commands that are there in that script can be executed, and these can be executed with help of interpreters such as Python. No wonder why Python is like, we all should learn Python. Python we can use anywhere, right? Even hacking, data science, even website design, Ruby. And nowadays Python is the most popular. Python is the most popular interpreter among hackers. And in IIBM Dr. Zakir Husain Institute, our alumni Nishant Krishna sir, he has written a very good book on hacking using Python, and it is being published by BPB. The moment we have the hard copy available, we'll be using it in our library, so be ready to go through his book which is written in Python for hacking, right? So script is something that you should be again familiar with. And then shell. So what is shell? It is nothing but, in Linux, it is like an environment. It is like an environment and interpreter for running commands. It is just an environment, an interpreter for running your commands. And the most widely used shell is called bash. It is called bash, and it stands for born again shell. Okay, and other than this, there are other shells like C shell and Z shell. Okay, but we will be using bash throughout our course, which is Linux for white hat hackers. Okay, so just be aware of these terms that you will come across almost every time. And terminal is nothing but your command line interface in Linux. Okay, just as you use command line prompt in Windows, in Linux we call that as terminal. Okay, so now you know the terms, the basic terms. Now in the next session we'll get into the tour of Kali Linux. Okay, all the best. Thank you.